Hello everyone. Before I start this video, I'm just going to give a little bit of advice. If you ever are to do some analysis on the top armies in Warhammer 40K, make sure you don't set the release date for that video, as the same day Games Workshop make an impromptu FAQ for those specific armies, because that is not ideal. Nevertheless, this was, or still is even, going to be the first in a series of videos where every month I look at the top performing armies of the previous month. And to do this, I'm going to look at the podiums for every single tournament that has 28 or more players, because this is what the ITC considers a GT. In addition to this, normally the plan will be to look at the winning lists and why it is these lists are dominating the meta. However, due to the fact that the FAQ came out today, I thought it would also be interesting to add something onto this. So I'm going to talk about how I think these armies are going to change and how the meta is going to change because of the changes in this FAQ. So in this video, all of the factions have got a score that is dependent on the number of podium placings that they've achieved. A win is of course worth more than a third place finish, so they will receive more points for doing so. Before we get to the actual podium for October, let's take a look at all the other factions for last month. So in this graph, we can see the performance of all of the armies except for the top three. Grey Knights are quite firmly in 4th place at the moment. As you can see, they have far more points than pretty much any other faction. However, there were still some really interesting performances, such as some great showings for Chaos Space Marines, including a win for Black Legion, and this can only bode well as they're about to get Death to the False Emperor, which is exploding sixes in combat against everyone, no longer just Imperium. Abaddon and his Warlord trait are both very pleased. So as you can see, any faction that isn't in that top 4 has really fallen behind, even a lot of the factions that were considered really good beforehand. So if we look at things like Adeptus Sororitas, some of the better Space Marine armies, even Harlequin's Death Guard, these armies were really struggling. They could often place really highly if they were piloted by a skilled player. However, now with the fact that all of the top armies except for Grey Knights have seen some changes, hopefully a lot of these armies will also see some resurgence. Now, I know I said that we were just going to cover the top 3 armies for last month, but I lied. So there we go. But we can not cover Grey Knights with that kind of performance, because really this was a 4-horse race. So let's take a look at the Grey Knights and what it is that makes them so good. The difference with Orks and Grey Knights, in my opinion, is not that they have this incredibly powerful codex, it's more the fact that they have a few just really good units. Most notably for Grey Knights, we have the Interceptor squads, and of course, the Nemesis Dread Knights. If you're not familiar with these two key units, I'm sure you will be shortly. The Interceptors are basically flying Grey Knights. They have a power they can move and shoot, so they're super flexible, and they have access to stratagems that just again really improve their flexibility in the game. The Dread Knights are vehicles. They are of course incredibly good in combat, but they actually have some really strong shooting, and there is a character option that is again really strong. These are usually upgraded in the same way, so a popular one is that the Grey Knight player is able to teleport the Nemesis Dread Knight when you target it in the shooting phase. Of course, that's incredibly powerful and keeps them very safe. There's also the ability for them to get a 3-up invuln, which in a pinch of course is always amazing. So because of the incredible output and flexibility of these two units, the most popular flavours of Grey Knights right now are Sword Bearers and Prescient Brethren. These improve the output of those Nemesis Dread Knights to give them even more punch. So interestingly, Grey Knights didn't get any adjustments at all in the FAQ that has come out. Even the flyer rule won't really affect them. Nobody was really running 3 Storm Ravens, very sadly. However, they might be affected by it more generally. I think one of the things about this meta that was really interesting was that people were having to tech for those quick buggies, tech for these AdMech planes. And so now that they're gone, this gives players more resources to take things like screens, and so Grey Knights might be affected by this indirectly. Going forward, I also don't think Grey Knights need too many changes. Most of the book is actually not that fantastic. They're mainly reliant on these units, and so I think they need a bunch of buffs as well as of course some tapering on the units discussed. So let's move on then to look at the actual podium for last month. I'm sure you can figure out what the 3 factions are, but I wonder if you can figure out the order. So in 3rd place, it's the one, the only, the boys in green, it's the Orks. So the most popular flavour of Mushroom definitely seems to be Freebooters. They have the ability to get +1 to hit once another Freebooters unit has already killed an enemy unit. Commandos and Storm Boys see a lot of play because they are very useful for playing the mission. Likewise, we see some really tooled up bosses because on Squigosaurs and on bikes, these can be really tough and really killy with the right upgrades. However, as you can see, the main thing you see in these lists is a lot of buggies. We've got squig buggies for shooting you out of line of sight, we've got dragsters for teleporting across the battlefield, and we've got scrapjacks and custom booster blasters because why the hell not? These things are amazing with a lot of firepower and they're pretty tough to bring down for their points, especially when they've got that ramshackle rule, which means they have an ability similar to transhuman. They have a -1 to hit if they want from Cloud of Smoke, and if you do manage to destroy them, well, they can move with Careen and blow up in your face. Always fun. These are often backed by some mech guns and planes who again have a really points efficient profile, and so they have a really powerful alpha strike if the Orks need. So of course, with those flyers being quite prevalent in the meta, this FAQ is going to massively affect that style of list because the alpha strike is massively lessened. But of course, the main change for the Orks in this FAQ is that they can only take 1 unit of each buggy in the army. This is huge. This means they can no longer spam their favorite type of buggies, so they will no longer have 9 buggies all with shooting that ignores line of sight. This is really big and I'm so excited for this change. There are still a bunch of varieties of Ork buggies, so that means Ork players can still take a load of them if they'd like to, and maybe they'll want to because the speed war rules are about to come out and they look pretty strong, so I suspect you're still going to see a lot of buggies in a lot of Ork lists. So let's look at the second place army for October, which is Beep Boop Admech. After the first half an hour of their turn is finished, they'll move on from the command phase and you will see that the Adeptus Mechanicus have some really amazing units. Rangers seem to be the most popular choice over Vanguards right now, however they are both incredible units for their points, and with access to Admech Wi-Fi they are able to be buffed across the battlefield. But the thing that is really interesting about Admech is that you can actually build your list to have a huge amount of combat punch. This used to take the form of priests of course, but now we have the infiltrators and rust stalkers who have hit the meta really hard. These provide great early board control, excellent trading units, and have a series of buffs and stratagems that work really well on them. I'm not going to go through all of the command abilities that the Adeptus Mechanicus have in this video, as you can check out the Admech video if you want to do that. But in short, they can kind of do everything. They can fall back and shoot, do actions and shoot, get more defensive, get more killy. They have access to a whole bunch of abilities. And because they come in so cheap so often, you're seeing Admech players just take extra characters with extra abilities just to get access to all of these as they need them. And they're not even limited by the normal factor of having to stay by those characters. Other units that we're still seeing quite a lot of, firstly we've got Iron Striders. Especially in single units they can be really powerful because they get a lot of efficiency out of those Mars rerolls. And then we have the Cerberus Raiders. They of course are able to move when you charge them, and so this makes them some of the best objective holders in the game. And then of course we have to talk about the planes because they're still just absolutely incredible. At -1 damage, toughness 7, 3 up save, -1 to hit, they're really tough to bring down for their points, and of course their output is really quite strong. We see both the bomber and the shooting variety. The mortal wound output from the bombers is always really useful, and having las cannons and cognis weapons that you can just get across the board turn 1 from the Stratoraptors means that your alpha strike is going to be absolutely incredible. And unsurprisingly, we're still seeing lots of Mars and Lucius in these Admech armies. Lucius because they're even harder to kill as Lucius, and that teleport adds a lot of flexibility, and Mars is still really great for just improving your output generally, and of course having access to Wrath of Mars because those mortal wounds, even capped at 6, are really quite devastating. So how does the new FAQ affect these Admech lists? Well, quite a lot, it would seem. So firstly, the aircraft rule was not specifically targeting Admech, but it has targeted them pretty damn hard. The 6-plane list is now gone. Then, of course, the points have changed for the Adeptus Mechanicus, and we've got some ones that we really wanted to see. I spoke about how they have so many of those auras typically. Well, the characters and some of the orders have gone up in points, and that means we're going to have less of them. And then the Rangers and Vanguard have both gone up to 9 points. They're still an absolute bargain, but because of some of their options have gone up in points as well, I think you're no longer going to be able to see 200 of those regularly in the game. Likewise, those units for that really crazy board control, they're all more expensive, and the planes, very, very thankfully, have also gone up in points. It's not all bad news. The robots have gone down, so maybe we'll see some more of them. But I think overall, this is going to really hurt Admech and bring them down in line with a lot of the other factions. And of course, I haven't played against this faction yet, but I would guess they're going to be pretty balanced going forward. And then finally, taking the number 1 spot in October, you guessed it, it's not that surprising, it's Drukhari. The evil space elves are still doing incredible work in the competitive scene. Cult of Strife, still the most popular witch cult. You still see a lot of Cabal of the Black Heart, and even Dark Technomancers is still rocking around because there are things like Kronos and Talos who can benefit from those abilities. The nice thing about Drukhari, of course, is that you do see a bunch of stuff from across the book. Of course, no one takes beasts, but outside of that, you get a good spread. So you do get a lot of witch cult because those witches coming out of those raiders, which will often be in the Cabal patrol, they're going to be able to spring up the board really quickly and put out a lot of attacks. There's normally a single squad of Cabalite warriors or Cabalite Trueborn even that will be able to provide just a bit more firepower with their blasters. And then racks are still really useful. Not a lot of people upgrading those with the weapons, but they're pretty good for backfield objective holding or just more units to have on the board. They've got some really great elite units as well. Those mandrakes are amazing for playing the mission with their ability to redeploy. Incubi are of course really difficult to deal with for some armies because of their ability to make you fight last. And then things like Hellions and Reavers are also seeing quite a bit of play because they're just very good at getting you engage points or harassing your opponent. They can have a surprisingly large impact on the game for their points. Courts of the Archon kind of started off as a bit more of a meme choice, but now they're really sticking around. You get a lot of wounds for your points in those Courts of the Archon, and they're still of course pretty good in combat, being just generally Drukhari. In terms of characters, again, you see a reasonable spread. Most often you'll see the Succubus, the Archon, and Jazar. The Succubus, of course, is amazing. She can do a ton of attacks. She can consolidate in any direction. She's absolutely amazing for 60 or 75 points. The Archon, of course, is just a really useful unit, granting those rerolls, quite difficult to bring down, can get some pretty solid fight last abilities if you want him to, or can have something like the Gym Blade to make him actually just generally pretty good in combat, especially with his ability to fight twice. But he is going to be outshone by Jazar because he appears in most of the lists that we see. He's absolutely incredible, especially with his Warlord trait to reroll hits and wounds. Again, he can fight twice, and he buffs all of those Incubi, which you're seeing in most lists anyway. And so how did the Drukhari do in the FAQ? Well, for starters, they got almost as many points drops as they got points increases. Overall, we can generally see increases on the Cabal and Witch Cult units, and we can see points decreases on the Coven stuff. So Homunculuses, Grotesques, and Talos have all gone down in points. This is going to lead to some big changes in Drukhari armies and how they are structured. They can no longer just spam all those witches and incubi units because they've gone up in points. Drukhari players might well be tempted to switch from Raiders to the trusty Venom. It will be really interesting to see how this unit comes out of it. I think overall this is a nerf to the army, but I definitely don't think Drukhari are down and out. They are going to be back up next month and hitting the meta pretty hard just with some tweaked lists. And so that gives us the podium overall for the month of October. So if we look back at that graph with these new scores added in, we can see that there was a big gap between these top 4 armies and everything else. So hopefully these nerfs will massively help readdress that balance, even for Grey Knights. Because if you think about it, people were teching so much for Squig Buggies, they were teching so much for the planes, they couldn't necessarily tech against Mortal Wounds and Grey Knights and that maneuverability. So hopefully we can tech just that bit more against Grey Knights, and this should even the playing field a bit. Overall, I think this is of course a really good change. We should hopefully see some really great resurgences from a lot of the 9th edition armies who have seen some buffs, and hey, maybe even things like Guard because of the buffs that they've got from this FAQ. It's very, very exciting. There are going to be more balances to come. GW have said this is going to be quarterly, so the game can only get better from here. As I said at the start, I've never done this type of video before, so let me know what you think. If you've got any feedback about this video, please do let me know and I'll take it on board for next time. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was really useful. Please do feel free to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you for the next one.